Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. And today I'm joined by Joshua Hicks, who is a professor of psychological and brain sciences at Texas A&M University. Let's learn together. Hi, Josh. Thanks so much for your patience. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah. I was saying to you earlier, I was just so sorry. And thank you so much for your patience. You know, the time difference and, while you're at home about to finish your day, we are, scrambling with public transport, trying to get here on time. And I think it's just really good for us to work on a show about happiness and have such a happy guest, I would say. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I was talking to you earlier and I was asking you, so how would you like to be introduced? And I think it's just unfair for me to read a few lines of the bio because I know that there's so much more to your work, especially because you're so passionate about meaning in life, which is something that we are talking about today. That is our topic. And so I would love for you to introduce a bit more about yourself to our audience so everyone can get to know you a bit better.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm a professor at Texas A&M. I study really existential psychology. And so the main topic I've looked at is sort of like what causes the experience of meaning in life. So what factors lead to that, as well as what is the benefits of perceiving your life to be meaningful. I also look at things related to authenticity. So similarly, like what makes you feel authentic and is it good to feel authentic? And how do you know your true self, for example, and basically topics related to those three things, I think, are the core. Most of my research revolves around.
It seems like a very interesting kind of research, very different from what people would think normally. Because I think when you said existential, I was like, the first thing I thought about was existential crisis. But I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for now, we always start by getting our guests to give us some recommendations about things that they like or things that they would share with the audience, just so we can get them to open up a bit more and also get to know the guest a bit more. And we call this section, Have You Met Josh? So are you ready to give your recommendations?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let's do it. The first thing we always ask, and this is my favorite questions of all time, which book would you recommend?
Really anything by John Steinbeck. He's my favorite author by far. And, just for my whole life, I've always liked anything I've read by him. So I feel like just reading him just makes you feel good in some ways. It's very good.
That is so interesting. What is the first book that got you hooked?
I think Steinbeck in general, or just reading. in general?
Steinbeck in general.
Steinbeck, the author. When I first started reading him, the first one that was really clear that I liked this one was Grapes of Wrath, the classic book. And that was really the first book I read. I was like, oh man, I really like the narratives in here and the storytelling and the different types of people, how they interact with each other.
That is super interesting. I've actually never heard of this author, so I'm going to put that on my list for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
The second question that we ask, this one is a bit more fun for people that don't read very often, which is, what is a movie you would recommend?
Oh, movie. Jeez. I think the movie I'd recommend, so I guess if you're just looking for anything funny, any Will Ferrell movies, older Will Ferrell movies, I think I like serious movies a lot. I like all types of movies, but sometimes you just need a good laugh. And I feel
Yeah.
like some of the old ones are really good.
Yeah. What is the movie that cracks you up the most?
Maybe Step Brothers, something like that.
I don't think I've watched that. Okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
there's a
I'll
couple.
have to. Yeah, I'll have to
Yeah.
watch that. Thank you. So we are, getting you on this podcast today, and so we also have to ask, which podcast would you recommend to our audience?
So I'm not the biggest podcast listener. My wife listens to everything under the sun, so I hear from her about that. I do listen to podcasts typically when I'm watching a TV show, and like to break it down in some ways. Like I'm watching House of Dragon, on HBO right now, and so I'll listen to something to break it down.
Yeah,
and so things like that. Sometimes science related stuff, sometimes true crime related podcasts. But but I often don't listen to as many as a lot of people do. It seems like
there's actually a show that breaks down House of Dragons.
Oh yeah, podcast. Yeah.
Oh my God, that is amazing. Yeah, I've been hooked on House of the Dragon, and I was just, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look for that one. Thank you. So the next one we ask, and this one is, I think, is probably close to your heart. Who is a role model or famous role model that you really admire?
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. I mean, I feel like I don't know about a famous role model. I mean, there's like academics that I look up to, but I think, I think there's strong people in my family. My wife, my mom, people like that. Grandparents and things like that. I've looked up to in some ways. I can't, for famous people, really, when growing up, I had some sports heroes type things, but I don't know if they're really role models or heroes. There's a little bit slight difference between the two. But
yeah. I think the question is really open. That person could be famous, or sometimes it's not a famous person at all, because a lot of our guests are saying, their role model would be their mom, their dad, or sometimes even their daughter, their son. I think it's just amazing to hear.
I think all those things fit for me. My parents, my children, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear. Finally, we want to ask you, I know you're a professor yourself, but what is the most recent course that you've actually completed?
So course I taught or taken?
The one that you've taken.
Oh my, that's so long ago. I feel last course I've taken was probably, I don't know. Does this count? So I'm trying to learn guitar, and then so I'm using this app to try to learn guitar. So there's this certain app that I've been using a lot to do it. So I guess that kind of counts. It's not psychology related, but it's
anything counts.
Some guitar.
Yeah, this is about you. This is not about psychology just yet. We are actually now going to actually get into psychology, and this is going to be the fun part because I love learning about this. So because as we've mentioned, this show is truly about happiness. We want to ask, anything under the sun about happiness. And before we go into the detail, we want to ask you, the first question is actually, what does happiness mean to you? Because it means so many different things to so many different people.
Yeah, I do think happiness, there's so many different flavors of happiness, and they do mean different things to different people. For me, it's a feeling of contentness, just feeling content, feeling secure. That's, to me, that's happiness, where don't have those worries around you, and you just feel like you can be yourself and be authentic, in a certain situation.
Yeah, I think we've got so many angles on happiness on this show at this stage, but I think the one that you mentioned has been something that I've been thinking about a lot myself recently. Like what does it mean? Because sometimes you do things and you think that it's good and it's something that will contribute to your happiness, but when you really think about it, it's not, because it's just something that people do. You feel pressure to do the same thing, or it might be because you're trying to please, I don't know, society, your parents. In my case, sometimes it's actually like that. And I feel like it's a really good thing to be able to differentiate what exactly it is that is
Yeah.
true to you. And I think it's actually related to our topic today, right? So we're
Yeah.
going to get into that in a little bit. But I think based on that definition, Josh, what would you say to be some of the misconceptions that people encounter, or you've noticed in your, in the people around you when they talk about happiness or when they think about happiness?
Yeah. I think that some of the misconceptions, I guess I would say, is, that you have to be loud and, laughing really loud and it's this high arousal type of happiness. And again, for some people that seems to fit perfectly well. That seems to be what they thrive on, their type of happiness. But for others, most people, I think it's not necessarily that. I think it's just, just feeling secure and feeling content and calm and peaceful in many
Mm.
ways. And so I think that's one of the things that people, when you think of the word happiness, most people in there, they have this image of somebody laughing really loud, and that certainly fits the bill. But it's more than that in
Yeah.
many different ways. And I think
Yeah.
another misconception is, what leads to happiness. Certainly, we have all sorts of things that we think of, like you said. Our society has taught us, so many different things lead to happiness, and not all of them do, it seems like, or at least long lasting happiness. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't
yeah,
agree more. I think sometimes happiness can look like tears, on your face because you're happy, and that's happy tears. It doesn't mean that you have to laugh out loud, just like you said earlier.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
all the pressures and things like that. Just sometimes this doesn't matter. And I feel like when we look at others and when we observe others, I know that the first instinct is probably not to observe but to judge. However, it's unfair to say, hey, this person's crying, they must be so sad, there's no happiness. That's not true. I think
yeah.
I've cried happy tears on so many occasions, and I think that's actually a really beautiful thing about life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, we can be happy in various different circumstances and show it
Yeah.
different ways. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. And that is a really great segue into the topic that you are the expert in. Now, let's
yeah,
talk about meaning in life a bit more, because we've actually touched on that while we were talking about happiness. And I feel like
yeah,
the relationship between meaning in life and happiness, that's, they're really tight. But first
yeah.
of all, you study it, so well, so deeply. And so let us please share with us, what does meaning in life actually encompass, and what is something about meaning in life that most of us probably don't know?
So, yeah, I mean, I think most people, when you define meaning in life, it's typically about, feeling like your life's coherent, feeling like it matters in some way, and feeling often it's synonymous with purpose in life. So you have clear goals and aims, or important goals and aims. And I think those that certainly fit within the definition, but I think it boils down to this feeling that life's significant in some ways, that your life's significant. And that could be because you have really strong goals that are you're tied to, but it could also be that you're making a difference. And I think more importantly, this is where some people don't quite think about this when they think about meaning, is that meaning in life is often derived from the world itself. Yeah, it doesn't have to be created in your head. You can detect it out there in the world. There's lots of things in the world that are just inherently meaningful, and those, I think, give your life meaning, people's life meaning too, when they pay attention to them and when they appreciate them.
Mm.
Little things, like talking to a friend, having a nice encounter in the morning or the evening with a stranger, even, just these sort of small little doses of meaning that we get every day, walking in nature, that type of stuff. So,
Yeah, I think that is new, I have to say. I don't think I've
yeah,
heard about that before as a definition of meaning in life,
yeah,
because I think and again, we are all learners here,
yeah,
we're all learning about this. I think it's interesting because from my perspective, I don't study meaning in life.
yeah,
I have not researched this topic a lot before, and I believe most of us, we talk about it with our friends maybe, but we don't actually think about it in the context of what you provided. Now,
yeah,
what that just told me is maybe what I thought about before was, it's not multifaceted enough. Maybe it's been just, really one sided, because to me, I've always thought, like meaning in life is something that you have to kind of find and define for yourself, because
Yeah.
this happens a lot, right? And I mentioned to you earlier, like when I heard that you're studying existential psychology, I was like, oh, maybe we could talk about existential crisis right now,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
a lot of people might be going through this. I'm
Yeah.
probably not the only one. I know that probably most of us, we go through that every now and again. And
Yeah.
while you said we can find meaning in little things in life,
Yeah.
I previously thought that it has to be something that is attached to you, and it had to come from within. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, that's
yeah.
what I think most people think, that meaning in life is something that you have to construct yourself. And part of it probably is, you have to find personally meaningful goals. Sometimes when you go through trauma, for example, you have to sort of try to make sense of it and try to make sense of your life again. So you are actively constructing meaning and figuring things out. But I think most of the time is really, we get meaning from these significant experiences in our life. And I think our experiences themselves matter so much, more than, I think most people actually know this at some intuitive level. But really, when the science of meaning in life hasn't looked at this as much, I think. But it seems to be very important. So if you ask people this slightly different question, what makes their life meaningful, or even what's the most meaningful experience they've had, for example, in the past week, most of them won't say anything about their goals. Most of them won't say anything about, the big differences they're making in the world. It's really what their most meaningful experiences are, these sort of almost, they're not mundane. I don't want to use that word, but they're commonplace, I guess. That's more, they're just the normal things that you have, that some people like, oh yeah, I haven't seen my friend in a while, and we just, we had lunch together, and that was very nice catching up. Little things like that seem to be very central to people's experience of meaning and life in general, really. So
yeah, I think that is a really good way to look at it. But I wonder, because this has happened to me before, I wonder if when we get to a stage where that is the norm, right? We enjoy going out with friends, we enjoy catching up with them every now and again, and that could be really meaningful. But if there's nothing new, nothing different, we're doing the exact same thing over and over again, and it's become a pattern, and you stop yourself and you're like, I don't find the meaning in anything anymore, even though the little things make you, maybe give you a split second of joy, or you're enjoying that experience in that moment. That's what I feel like is probably one of the most dangerous things that I've noticed sometimes. And I catch myself thinking about that, and I was like, no, let's not go there. Yeah.
Again, it's not, those situations don't always give you meaning, provide a sense of meaning. It's also on you, and how you interpret the situations, how you interact with the situations, how open you are to the situation itself. And so there's times in life, in everyone's life, there are times in everyone's day, where things, you can't really appreciate the small things. And so, it's hard to find meaning during those times. You might be focused on other stuff too. And it's all important too. I mean, obviously, if you're working really hard towards an important goal, sometimes you don't have time to step back and appreciate everything about it, and, find it meaningful in the moment. But, a day later, you might say, oh, I'm so glad I did this thing. And so that's why when you say meaning's multifaceted, that's where all the little components come in. They all are connected in some way, and they're all kind of work together in some way too. So.
That is super interesting. I think there's actually so much more to unpack, and we'll go into your research in a little bit as well, which will be very exciting. But I wonder, in this context, we've talked about happiness. Now we've touched on meaning in life. And like you said, it's very multifaceted. What is the relationship between these two components here? First of all, how does meaning in life affect your happiness? And second of all, what else is there to this relationship? It's probably not one-sided.
No, it's definitely not. And I've spent a lot of my work earlier, looking at how happiness can influence meaning, for example. And so there's been a lot of experimental studies, influencing people's positive mood, for example, and showing that if you increase people's positive mood, it increases their self-report of meaning in life too. And so it's definitely a bi-directional relationship in some ways. I think that they're really closely related, but they're not one can influence the other and the other influences the other thing too. And we like to think of them as these two separate things, which they are, but there is also, a tremendous overlap between the two also. And I know lots of people try really hard to distinguish them and say, this is meaning, this is happiness, and it's really almost impossible to do that completely because there's such an overlap between the two. Going back to the first question though, like was meaning lead to happiness? I think that's sort of a lot of people have thought that. That's why there's a million, self-help books out there to find purpose in life, because I think people think that once you find this thing, it leads to happiness. The truth is most people feel like their life's pretty meaningful. And so, it doesn't necessarily, again, it co-varies with happiness. I think when you lose your sense of meaning though, or lose your sense of happiness, so you go through trauma, for example, it's really important to sort of have that sort of sense of meaning, whether it's purpose or a sense of mattering or sense of coherence, whatever it is. And I don't know if that gives you happiness per se, but it certainly mitigates some negative emotions along the way. And so, having that, even if you're going through a bad thing, knowing that, okay, there's going to be an end out here. This is going to help me grow as a person. I'm going to be fine after I get through these hard times. And so I think, during that time, I still don't think the person can be happy necessarily, but they can be less miserable, certainly. And I think meaning helps with that and gets them through it in some ways.
Yeah.
So I think they're both related in many ways. I think, people often, again, have this idea that meaning leads to happiness, but I think the other direction, certainly it's true also.
I don't want to raise a chicken and the egg kind of question, but I do have to ask, because I understand now you're saying that they have this relationship that's really dynamic where one adds to the other. And it's not like, like you can fully separate them. They affect each other. But here's, I think, to me, the golden question.
Yeah.
Does meaning in life lead to happiness, and then in turn happiness adds to meaning in life? So essentially, which one comes first in my question, or is it the other way around?
So I mean, what comes first? I don't know. You have to go back to infancy, I guess. When they're making sense of the world, I feel like happiness probably comes first in some ways. It's probably, but again, a child gets rewarded when they're able to, figure things out, and you can think of that as a small way of making meaning of the world. And it brings them happiness. So,
interesting.
That's a really good question, but I don't know, if there's really good answer to it, except that it's tricky. The easy answer is.
Actually, you have a good point, because I feel like all the books that I've been reading recently, every single book is like, you have to go back to your childhood, even if it's trauma, even if it's like what you're doing in life, go back to your childhood. And I'm like, but I don't remember anything from my childhood. So like you're right. I think it's a different field of study to actually identify what comes first. And maybe it's different for each child, like you said. So there's no right answer, I would say, at this stage. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly both influence each other. I think when we talk about how meaning is multifaceted, I think you can have some of those facets of meaning not low in those facets. Like you might not be able to understand things, have clear goals, and you could still be happy though, in some ways, if you have some other things, parts of meaning that are high in, if that makes sense. So,
yeah. That's wonderful. I think it's interesting to think of the relationship in more detail. And I feel like what you're saying just gave me an idea that we probably need to do an audit of our life in the first place and kind of see what has happened in our life, because it would be different for each person. And then we'll be able to, maybe find a way to increase or add to our meaning in life, or actually work on the level of happiness first. And of course, we cannot completely separate the two, but being able to find a way to work on one aspect will essentially lead to the other aspect also being better. So that's great to know. Definitely. It's gonna take some time to learn. I love journaling, so I'm just like thinking in my brain, how am I going to journal this out? This is interesting. So I think we talked about your research earlier, and let's go a bit more into that because my team has done some research into your research.
Yeah.
So that is why we found out that you have a journal called The Science of Meaning in Life, and I believe
Yeah.
you published that in 2021. So that was
Yes.
during the pandemic still last year.
Yeah.
You separate the definition between the meaning of life and the meaning
Yeah.
in life. Could
Yeah.
you care to explain a bit more to us about that?
Well, when I say study meaning of life, most people assume it's meaning of life. And that's really a question for, it's a question for anyone, but usually something that's for academic settings, like philosophers might study or theologians, like what's the reason I'm here? What's the meaning of my existence? And I don't necessarily study that. I study your subjective experience of meaning, that your feelings that you have meaning in life. I think that if if there's a clear reason why you're here, if you have that, the meaning of life, you probably also experience meaning in life, if that makes sense. But not necessarily the other way around. I think you can experience meaning in life without knowing or thinking that there's actually a reason for you to be here, for example.
Yeah.
And so lots of people would say, the meaning of my life is, X and Y and Z. Usually it's related to religion. Sometimes it's related to, helping your children or doing something like this, generativity type stuff. And certainly all those things are related to meaning in life. But the experience of meaning in life itself, though, you don't have to have that sort of clear understanding of why you're here or know why you're here or know what you're supposed to do in some sense.
Yeah. So what you're saying in simple terms, as far as I understand, is meaning of life is something that is probably more philosophical. And whereas we're talking about meaning in life, which is more psychological.
Yeah, I think so. Psychological in that it's a feeling or experience that we all, we value both of them. We value the answer to the meaning of life, but we also value this experience of meaning in life. We often, when we say our life feels meaningless, it's the feeling, it feels like, you're void of something in some ways. And certainly if you knew the answer, one clear answer that could sort of fill that void for some people, but for a lot of people, they don't need that answer to fill that void. They can just, find meaning by, just living a good life, interacting with people, having good social connections, things like that.
Yeah. That is so interesting because, I'm not a native speaker myself, but like the change in preposition makes it completely different, like you said. And and I guess, I don't know, even for native speaker, it's probably going to take some time to think. And I'm already thinking about how am I going to translate this into my mother tongue Vietnamese for my friend to understand. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do that. It's so interesting. So definitely something to ponder upon. But I think one more thing that I noticed, and this is actually a discussion between our team and way before we could invite you on the show, is we used to mention purpose in life.
Yeah.
Before we changed, before we changed it, the one of the elements in our framework to be meaning in life, and because we're talking about happiness, it's like very structured because we're trying to structure happiness into a science, and we have the framework. When we started having that conversation, I was sort of like, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a researcher, and all of this is making me very interested. Like, I'm pondering what's going on there. Why is there such a distinguished sort of difference between purpose in life and meaning in life? And I guess for you, because you study this so deeply, please share with us, what do you think?
So it's a wonderful question. And people often, purpose and meaning are often used as synonyms, like they're the same thing for a lot of people. I think studying meaning in life, though, I think you can think of purpose either as sort of a facet or part of meaning in life, or sort of something that leads to meaning in life, that experience. And purpose can also be sort of, you can clarify it too, you can have a purpose of life, like meaning. And so like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing here, purpose of life. But purpose in life is just like I said before, people are, if you have clear goals, satisfying goals, typically long-term goals too.
Mm.
It provides you a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Often goals related to helping other people, I think, or give you that sense of purpose related to other goals. Putting effort in those goals, all that stuff, leads to a feeling of purpose, and that leads to a feeling of meaning or intertwined with meaning.
Yep.
But it's not all meaning at all. I think that you can have clear goals, and if there's something else about them, that if they're not quite for you, if they're not like intrinsic to who you are, I don't think they'll provide a sense of meaning per se. It's like, yeah, I have a purpose, I know what I'm supposed to do, but this is not really fulfilling. This is not valuable to me because these are goals are extrinsic to my true nature. So.
Yeah, that's so interesting because you mentioned fulfilling. That word really struck something. And I guess before personally, I thought, oh, if I have a purpose, then, I should feel fulfilled, chasing that. And like you said, it's a goal or, multiple goals.
Yeah.
But now it sounds like they're different because purpose is part of meaning. And so there's so much more to meaning in life.
Yeah. And purpose, for it to be a really fulfilling purpose, I think it has to be like connected to your core self or your core values and core goals. You can have a purpose of being, doing some sort of career or some sort of profession, but maybe that's not really what you wanted to do. Maybe it's because your parents wanted you to do that or something else. And even if you try really hard to do that, it might not be as fulfilling than if it's something that you're intrinsically motivated to pursue.
Yeah. So, actually, now that you said that, I feel like the relationship between purpose and meaning would probably be similar to the relationship between meaning in life and happiness, just like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I feel like if say a college student, doesn't know what they're doing, they graduate, they're confused on what they should do with their life, and then they start a new job and they love it. They love everything about it. They realize that what they do matters to other people, and they are really invested in that. I think that is a good example of that, where you can now find some purpose in some ways, and now your life feels a little bit meaningful. In some ways. And, I think some people would argue if your life, so you think of meaning, another sort of a facet of meaning is sort of coherence in some ways. So feeling like you understand it, you can make sense of it. I think that makes it easier to find purpose too, once you understand it, clearly. So if you understand life, you kind of know what to do with it. And so it'd probably be harder to find a true sense of purpose if you had no understanding of yourself or life in general.
Yeah. I know this is psychological, but I feel like it's also very philosophical at the same time.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about life and, like finding purpose and meaning in our life and the reason we're here and values and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like, it's just such a broad topic. I can see now how much time you spend researching all of this, because there's got to be so much to study about.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's interesting. What's the best part about studying meaning in life is teaching it, actually. I think teaching it in my classes, I teach an existential psychology class, and it's not interesting that I'm telling them what it's about. It's interesting hearing their perspective on it. And, every semester, students I get mind blown by how intelligent they are and how they can creatively think about meaning in ways that I haven't thought about before. Yeah. And so you're right. There's it's a huge topic, and there's so many different ways of looking at it. And there's so much more we don't know about it in some ways. And I think it's, my students have certainly shown me, that people do care about this topic. They've thought about it before, not just in a class, not just studying for a test, but they think about these things sometimes. And, people seem to generally care about meaning, feeling like their life's meaningful.
Yeah. I think even though maybe when we were younger, or maybe when people were younger, they didn't think much about it, but I would think that to a certain age, people start thinking about it more.
Yeah.
And it is such a human experience. Hey, it's like something that everyone interprets in a different way because we are all very different. So like you said, it's a never-ending learning journey for you because like you're teaching, but you're also learning from your student. And that's the best part. Yeah.
Really. And learning from life, because you think you have it figured out and something happens and, it challenges your worldview and the way you think about things. And you have to, be open to learning more about it.
Yeah. Now that you've mentioned that you learned through the challenges and learned from them, I would actually ask you about this in the sense of a society, because we all experience hardships. We all go through things. I don't believe there is such a human that never goes through any kind of hardship. So to us, it's a very human experience. We as humans share certain things. And I think even though like we said earlier, meaning in life would be different for different people, it's a unique experience. And even if you study it, you probably have some more to study, moving forward in your life. So what would be some of the common things that people can draw upon to sort of think about the global sense of meaningfulness?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase that? Or you mean what are the things that provide meaning in general?
The question is more about what are some of the common things that humans share that we can all draw from so we can get our sense of meaning.
Well, I think the main thing is, the biggest contributor to our sense of meaning is a sense of belongingness and a sense of community and social connections. A lot of people have argued that meaning is just about connections, and I think social connections fit with that so much. Everything that I talked about in terms of coherence, purpose, matter, all that stuff revolves around other people. And the true stuff, think about purpose. Most people's probably satisfying purpose is dealing with family members, often, their children, giving back to their children, teaching them to learn. Feeling like you matter in some ways. That's all about generativity and often giving back to other people. So it's really about connecting with people, being altruistic, helping other people, being a good moral person, all that type of stuff, and sort of benefiting the greater good. I think all of that stuff is what's universally contributes to meaning. Although, it's depending on where you live and what you're taught growing up, we often don't think like that. We know at some level, obviously, that that's important and so forth, but we like to prioritize other things more important, over that. And I think that can detract from our sense of meaning. When you neglect people that you were once close with, for example, and so forth.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are so many things that are really just close to us. We see them every day, and they are, they obviously contribute to our sense of meaning, and it is such a human experience. So obviously, while we have common themes, we have things that would be different to each person, and that's totally okay. But I think when we talk about meaning in life, I think you mentioned this briefly earlier, and I don't know if this is related to the misconceptions about happiness, but some people declare that meaning in life is rare or impossible. What are your thoughts on this?
Certainly not. And I think there's a lot of data. Laura King and many other people have shown that most people rate their lives meaningful. Most people think their lives are pretty meaningful. It's typically, when things go bad, it can really detract from your sense of meaning. And sometimes people just have lower sense of meaning overall, and they can do things to benefit that. I don't think it's rare at all. I think people think it's rare when they think that you're supposed to figure it out. There's this mystery out there. There's this answer to the meaning in life, and it's your goal to construct it and figure it out for yourself and, make sense of it yourself. And there's one right answer. And the fact is there's a million right answers. And like I said before, meaning's all around us, and that's why it's not as rare as people think. I think if, people are just become aware of, to slow down, appreciate the things that are actually meaningful, I think their whole life in general will be more meaningful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, I want to throw in a question different from what we discussed earlier and prepared.
Yeah.
But you mentioned technology when we started this
Yeah.
call, and I have to talk
Yeah.
about it now because I've just made some connections from what you just mentioned earlier. And I think one of the key issues that we are facing as a society is, I don't know what to call this, but social media.
Yeah.
We have comparison, we compare our lives to other people's lives, and we compare our low lives to other people's highlights. And that
Yeah.
sometimes take away the meaning in your
Yeah.
life,
Oh, yeah.
particularly. And I feel like that, I mean, I cannot say that it hasn't happened to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up. It has definitely happened to me before, but I've even noticed it's happened to even more people now. And we know during the pandemic, it was a bit different because everyone was, going through the same thing or inside. But now that, life's kind of happening again, people are going out and about, and having experiences, I've noticed it's so much more in my circles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that even before the pandemic, there's a lot of data showing, children are more depressed and suicide rates are higher and all this stuff. And I do think it's a lot what you said. Social media, we do a lot of social comparisons. Often that bums us out, when we see people that we think are doing better than us, because everyone self-presents, and everyone gives their best face on social media. And you see that too much, it can make you feel like you're not as good in some ways. And also you put your value on how many likes you have and how many, all this type of things that can really distract from not just meaning, but your happiness. And there's a lot of data that suggests this. I think that's certainly true. And I think that's, a big problem that we as, we have to deal with. If we want people to be happy and lead a meaningful existence, it's something that we have to think about really hard. Think about what we can do to sort of alleviate this sort of dilemma that we're in. I think it's not just the social comparisons, though. I think going back to finding meaning in the small things, I think it's when the frequent use of just smartphones in general, social media in general, it detracts from just being present in the environment, in your natural environment. You're not likely to talk to people at the bus stop. You're not likely to, do things. You just focused on your phone and doing your own thing. Yeah. I think before there's more of a chance to talk to people, get to know new people, and, just, see people as who they are, as good people. And we lose sight of that, I think, the more our faces are, drawn to the screen of the phone in some ways.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I mean, I have to say, as an introvert myself, I find it better to not have to talk to people in public.
Yeah.
Because it causes me a lot of social anxiety. I just like to be prepared.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not talking. I mean, you don't necessarily have to talk per se, but being present, being part of the environment, observing the environment. Maybe you find just overhearing, a lady talking to her, a woman talking to her daughter, like a nice conversation, or you see somebody do something nice for each other. You're not going to do, if you're just focused on yourself, you're not going to see those type of things. Or nature, nature is a great way to, feel like life's significant, being out there and really appreciating the beauty, the natural beauty and artificial beauty, the beauty that we create in architecture and so forth. And less likely to see that. Yeah.
That is a really good point, because I was thinking about it the other day. I feel so bad about it, but I have to talk about it, because now that we're mentioning meaning in life and being present.
Yeah,
I went to 2 concerts recently. It was really amazing. Love it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I'm enjoying it. But I was like, oh, but I want to relive it later. So immediately I took out my phone, like a true millennial, took out my phone and filmed. And then I was like, no, but I want to actually put it away and like dance and sing and then I was just like, I had this internal battle. I want to enjoy the moment, but I also want to capture it so I can relive it again. So that I was like, exactly what you're saying. I wasn't fully present, and I feel really bad about it.
Did you want to relive it, or did you want to share it in social media and show people?
I want to relive it.
I feel like a lot of people do that.
Yeah, I know, but I actually watch it again. and again,
Yeah.
because I go to, I love going to seeing live music and love going to gigs.
Yeah.
And I always have some concerts I enjoy more than others, and I try to put my phone away, but I
Yeah.
always, come back and like watch them again on my phone. Like I
Yeah.
don't always share them per se, but yeah, I just
Yeah.
enjoy that so much because it's so different from listening to music on Spotify. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I struggle because I wanted to be fully
Yeah.
present, and now I feel bad because I wasn't fully
Yeah.
present. And it's exactly what you're saying. So I found that to be so interesting, and I feel like this is
Yeah.
something that, because everyone at the concert was doing the same thing, and that's
Yeah.
what that moment struck me, because I was like listening to the music, I was so enjoying it,
Yeah.
and at one point, every single person, because
Yeah.
I don't know, something triggered it. I don't know what it was. Maybe
Yeah.
it's I don't know, social media worthy moment. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Immediately, thousands of people got their phone out at the same time to film it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's when it hit me. I was like, wait, what is happening?
Yeah.
Not in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's what your head's telling you. You should take this picture. Everyone else is doing it. Your heart's probably knows what's right. That you'd enjoy it more if you're just in the moment and flow
Yeah.
with the experience. I think that's part of what makes things meaningful too. Is that sort of self-transcendence, things like going, to concerts and really appreciate and really being immersed in the music and
Yeah.
around other people. And it's hard to do, if you bring your phone out, you kind of lose that. You go back to the self. You're not like,
Yeah.
part of the bigger thing in some ways.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah. That's very common, I think, for most people. The shows I go to, everyone's, has their phone up and everything like that. So
Yeah.
it's a common thing. I think it's, again, you get these social norms of doing it. You feel like you do it yourself. And maybe for you, that's good to know that some people actually do rewatch it. I always have this idea in my head
love
that most
rewatching
people,
it.
yeah, don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I love rewatching it. I remember in 2019, 2019, I think it was my first concert in Australia when I just moved here. And I was like, this is so amazing. I obviously was enjoying it so much. And then, I filmed a little bit of it. I think it was Ed Sheeran. And I just kept rewatching it over and over. And it's so amazing because I couldn't believe it. I had to relive it because I couldn't believe it. It was like, and everyone's like, your footage was so calm. And I was like, because I was dying inside. I was enjoying it, but also, anyways. So definitely, I would say yes, some people do rewatch things that they film, definitely.
Yeah.
But what I was saying was I felt horrible in that moment because I was like everybody else, just pulling out my phone. Even if my purpose was to rewatch it again, I was like, I'm not present right now. What am I doing here? Because I want to enjoy the experience, not to Instagram it, So that's what I was thinking when you mentioned, being present. And actually, when we talk about nature, it's really nice that you mentioned that. I think we can maybe mention that in our practice section now because that's more practical. Maybe you have some tips for us to actually attach what we do on the daily or on the weekly with our our lives. So let's talk a bit about the practical side of thing. So Josh, you study it, you are a professor, you teach meaning in life, but what is a practice that you actually do in your life to discover or enhance your meaning in life?
Yeah, I haven't been very good at sort of finding meaning in my own life, ironically, until recently, I think. I think recently having kids and really just sort of being mindful of, like, I need to slow down. I think slowing down in general is key, to finding meaning in life. It's slowing down and also being aware that life is really short. There's so much. You're not going to be here that long. My kids aren't going to be around and living in my house for that long. What am I doing worrying about this work and doing this and worrying about whatever it is that's going on? Those things are important, but I should actually, during the day, I should find some good moments with my children or with my wife or with whoever it is. I should, it's up to me, it's up to me to some extent to find meaning in my life or detect the meaning that's out there, I should say. And so slow down, just be aware of that. Tell yourself, don't stress out right now. Nothing really matters in the grand scheme of things. Everything about work, everything about, most things about life don't really matter that much. And so I think we can, if you slow down and realize that, you can, stop, appreciate things, things that you used to appreciate when you're younger, or find new things to appreciate. And those type of things, I think I've really tried, especially in the past few years, to do. And I think it's really helped in many ways. So it's kind of like being mindful, but also, just being aware of, of life's short, and being aware when your mind drifts in some ways, when you're too stressed out over some things. I think taking a step back and saying, okay, I could get stressed out a little bit, but I don't have to, this doesn't have to bum my whole day out. I can take a step back and still, still live a happy, meaningful existence, even in the face of this stress.
That is so interesting that you just admitted to us that you're not actually good at it yourself, and you have to kind of like do this practice to work on it yourself. Do you talk to your students about this? Are you open about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, it's not, I don't think we're necessarily raised in a culture that values, tells us that we should, appreciate the things out there, those small things out there, and find meanings everywhere. You should do it. We're in this culture that you have to, for most people at least, you're supposed to find a purpose, do really good at it. And a purpose is usually related to making money or your job or whatever it is, and just focus on these things. Put your head down put your nose to the grindstone and just work really hard. Yeah. And there's benefits to that too, obviously, in some ways. But I think, when you just focus on some things like that, you miss out on so many different things that make life beautiful.
Yeah. That's great to hear, because I guess this is funny, but like I guess when I was still going to uni and things like that, I was wondering if the professors teaching me these things actually practice those things. So now that you've mentioned it, it's kind of like, great. I'm so glad we have you on the show, Josh, because you're very honest and you're open, and teaching is not about being perfect yourself, but actually learning with your students, and that's really good to hear. So back to the practice.
Sorry. Go for it. I was just going to say, when I first started as assistant professor 13 years ago, I don't think I had much meaning. I felt like my goal was just to get publications. My goal was just to, get, tenure and do all this stuff. And, I was just focused on that singular goal in some ways. And, I think it's hard just to do that and really maintain a meaningful existence, because you realize that those little goals are not that important in the long run. And, there's other things out there that you're missing when you just do that.
Super interesting. Yeah. I have already thought of some good things that come out of the practice you just mentioned already, but I would love for you to recap to us. You mentioned that you, want to be more mindful, and, you take time to actually practice that yourself. So what are the 3 good things that it's brought to your meaning in life?
I think 3 good things. I think I think I am able to appreciate the smaller things more. And so I can find it more frequently and savor it more too, so when you appreciate the smaller things, I think there's so many smaller things out there. You can look at a bird, as ridiculous as that sounds. Sometimes it's like, oh, look at a little bird, it's like before you didn't, it's like it can bring happiness and meaning. I think also related to that, and probably just as important, more important even, I think you build stronger connections to other people. Being there, slowing down a little bit. It's like you're more authentic. I think people appreciate that. If it's people you already know, you even build better relationships with them, because you're able to actually form a deeper bond, because you're listening to them. You're not just thinking about, this project they have to finish and all that, which it's hard for people. Where, again, I don't judge people who do think like that, because I thought like that for so many years. It's hard. We have to have this career, and we think we have to have a certain type of lifestyle or whatever it is. And it's hard to switch these priorities.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's something that I would say I'm struggling with on the daily. So I think that's really good to hear. And we'll definitely take time to practice that. I think for me, morning meditations really help. To you is more like, setting time to do it. So actually, you said it was, a challenge for you for a very long time, and then you start practicing this.
Yeah.
When you first started practicing it, what were some of the challenges that you encountered? Because, if you first start something, it's always hard.
Yeah. I mean, just the normal, that's not how I've been doing it for years. And so I have this habit of going back into this sort of thinking style, this sort of thinking style of only focusing on one goal, getting anxious, when that goal is not going how I wanted it to go, and so forth. And so it's hard to break those type of habits, those sort of thought habits and however you want to call them. But it's important to just keep trying, I think, keep trying, being aware of what you want to do and what type of life you want to live. And just keep trying. You're going to fail sometimes, and that's all right. But as long as you keep on putting effort, it gets a little bit easier, it seems like. And, sooner or later, it's like you're living a life more in line with what your ideal life you thought it would look like.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something that all of us can learn from, because it would be a lie to say that we don't go through that at all. We all, find moments of struggle and go through the challenges of actually switching to a stage where we can mindfully focus on one thing and deal with the situation at hand. And so I think from what you're saying, it sounds like whenever you catch yourself in the situation where you're kind of like, okay, my mind's everywhere, you catch yourself and you actually practice being mindful and focusing on whatever it is that you're doing. But I guess for everybody else who hasn't started doing this before, how should we start, maybe building that into our routine? Should we do that daily or should we do it just, ad hoc whenever we feel like we need it?
Yeah. I think, I tell my students, one thing that they can do, and doesn't sound like it's super helpful in some ways, but to remind yourself that nothing matters. I think that's really important. Like, nothing matters. I tell them that, when they start, I'm like, don't worry, you should all talk in class. It doesn't matter if you say something inarticulate. It doesn't matter if you're nervous. Nothing matters. No one cares. And, in that sense. And I think just putting that in your mind and sort of telling that, and I'm not saying that nothing matters, by the way, things matter. Your actions do matter, but the things that you think matter are probably not correct in some ways. For most people, the things that we think are so important are not very important at all. It's getting the best car, getting the best promotion, all those things that make us full of anxiety and make us depressed, when we don't achieve those goals. Those things aren't very important, really. People can find happiness and meaning, just by slowing down a little bit, I think.
So in general,
so that's, keep that in your mind. Keep it in mind that it doesn't matter too much. You can, life is short, so you should try to focus on these things. But if you fail, sometimes it's not the end of the world either. So have a little self-compassion also. So,
Yeah, that's really good to learn. I think it's it's just something that we should practice on the daily and just start thinking about it more. And for each person, they would probably approach it differently. For me, what I've learned from this is just to remind myself. And as I said, I really love journaling. So maybe when I start journaling, I'll remind myself in the journal entries to actually slow down and take it easy. Everything matters, but also nothing matters. That's what I've learned from this. Exactly. It's so interesting.
That's a perfect way to think about it.
Yeah. Because I was like recently, there's this sort of meme on the internet where you're like, think of your problem, think of how small you are. Zoom out, from the universe's perspective, you're this tiny. So nothing matters, but everything matters to you. So that's so interesting. Anyways, thank you so much for that practice. I think it's really good. And for me, I already see a really huge impact on our level of happiness and perception in life when we start doing that. Not just meaning in life, but you're so much more in the big picture of happiness. So really, thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add on the topic of this practice?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's, anytime you want to change yourself, I think it takes time. It takes work. Don't be afraid to talk to people, like therapist even, or someone you really trust. There's no shame in admitting that you're struggling with something or that you want to improve on some aspect of your life, your mental health in this case. and so it takes work, but it's just realize you don't have to figure it all out right now. In some ways, it's just a try, put an attempt to figure it out.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that and sharing it. So let's actually tackle some questions from our audience. We've
Okay.
got some very interesting questions because
Okay.
when we share that we have this topic, the list of questions became extra long compared to usual. So yeah, as I mentioned to you, this is probably something that everyone thinks about, even if maybe when we were younger we didn't think about. One of the most interesting question I found is not about this particular person, but they ask what to do when our friend said they don't have any meaning in life.
Yeah, that's actually a good one. I mean, so it depends. I think it's one thing is you've got to figure out like why they're saying that in some ways.
Mm.
I mean, and that could have different implications for how you handle it. I think first of all that they're talking to you, that's key right there. I mean, showing them that you're a source of support, show them unconditional love, that type of stuff, is going to reaffirm that your life does have meaning to it. That life can be meaningful. But if it's because they hate their job or they or don't know what to do, then give them advice. I think to consider other options. Consider other options out there. Do different things. Go back to school or go someplace or stay with your. You don't have to quit your job necessarily, but you could get another job. Actually, you could do something different in some ways, and so. I think a lot of people, right now there's that great resignation people are talking about. I think it's because people are, realizing this is not what I wanted to do in some ways.
Yeah.
Or this is not fulfilling for me right now. And so, you could, tell them, give them this advice and, and just reassure them that it's normal. Everyone has these feelings sometimes. If it's because they can't make sense out of something, and they're going through trauma, for example, then, also listen to them, but, really try to convince them, go talk to a professional too, the people that are smarter than me that are there, that have a lot of experience talking to people about trauma and things like that. And
so, that's such a good point because you mentioned earlier, right? One of the common things that we share when it comes to our meaning in life is our connections. And even just having that connection, for example, noticing your friend saying there's no meaning in their lives and actually being there for them and supporting them, even just moral support in this sense is already so helpful. And I think, for this person to ask this question, I think that's, such a nice thing that they're trying to figure out to help their friends.
I would say one thing too, I mean, keep on following up with your friend too. I mean, that's not just that one time when they tell you, but you're actually showing them that their life does matter because you care about them, and that you're talking to them and you're staying in touch with them, that type of thing. So it's not, I mean, there's other things too. Obviously, if the person's clinically depressed or some other things, they might need, other types of help, but that's a good start. Yeah.
That's going to be tougher. Yeah, definitely a tougher conversation, but being there for them is always very helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have another question, which I think this one is very, I would say, not just psychological now, but maybe a little bit into philosophy. But I think, you covered some of it already. And now perhaps we can package it nicely to answer this audience. When they ask, how do we figure out our purpose and meaning in life? And how do we know if that's really what we're meant to do? Very philosophical, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea if that's what's meant to do. I think one thing for me, people might have different beliefs depending on if they're very religious, for example, or if they have different things. For me, I think there's probably many things that we're meant to do, that we're capable of doing, that can, give us happiness. Like I could be a professor. I could have also been many different other things that probably still been. It felt like life's just as meaningful. And being aware of that, there's just like there's multiple ways to find meaning, there's multiple aspects of ourselves, and we can find things that sort of gel with all those different aspects in some ways. And so, that's one thing is, just being aware that, there's different ways, different things that could sort of make you happy. So maybe there's not one in particular that's meant for you, in some ways, and other things are. And so, Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to tell them an answer to answer that other than say that, there's probably lots of things that are meant for you. You're probably good at
Yeah.
many different things. There's probably things that you can identify with.
Yeah.
And so maybe, just try to open your mind a little bit. That's hard to do sometimes also for everyone. And just,
Mm.
think about all the options out there because there's a billion different
Yeah.
options for anything.
That is
Yeah.
so true. I so love this topic and love your answer. Thank you. I think I have to add to that by saying, well, it is something that you definitely, I think personally, when I read this question, I think that this person needs to figure that out for themselves because there's no
Yeah.
one that can tell them, hey, this is your purpose, this is your meaning, because it's different.
Yeah.
As we said before, right, Josh, we mentioned this before, it's so different for every single person, and
Yeah.
it's a unique experience for yourself. What you like might be something that somebody else dread,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like it can be like or it can be I met this person at a networking event. She is a lawyer and a violinist at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and those two things gave her meaning.
Yeah.
And another example, like yours truly, right here.
Yeah.
I was not a podcast host starting out my career. I'm
Yeah.
a project management professional. And now
Yeah.
I'm dipping my toes into doing operations. And I'm also
Yeah.
doing podcasts. So there's
Yeah.
so many things that a person is capable of. And just like you said, Josh, and I heard before that
Yeah.
you're studying guitar. So you can be a professor and a
Yeah.
guitarist. And,
Yeah.
that's totally
Yeah,
fine.
you don't have to be one thing. You could be different
Yeah,
things. And
exactly.
yeah, different things can be. I think you should try to find your work meaningful. I think it's important since you spend so much time on it, but it doesn't have to be the only thing either, in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
life. And that's what
exactly.
most people, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
true. Yeah, we've been talking about work, but exactly, there's so much more to life, and
yeah,
totally agree with you. That is such a nice way to close this, actually,
yeah,
and thank you so much for answering all the questions. Before we
yeah,
let you go, there's a final section. We call it open mic. This is
yeah.
where you have your sort of TED Talk kind of stage. You can talk
Oh,
about
yeah,
anything.
yeah,
Anything and everything under the sun that you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be about this topic. But given that you're so passionate about this topic, I wouldn't be surprised if you mentioned something about meaning in life.
yeah, yeah. I think I was initially going to talk about technology, and I think it's related to that. I think the most important thing that we should as a society try to figure out is, what are we doing to detract from meaning for other people's? How are our actions detracting from other people, making other people's lives feel less meaningful? And I think it's particularly with older people. I think when, not too long ago, before technology, we looked at older people as a source of wisdom. We talked to them, we would have these connections with them. If we had a question, we'd call our grandparents or, and now it's not like that. It seems like if we have a question, we look at our smartphone and we figure it out really quickly. And I think with that, I'm positive it leads to less sense of mattering for, people of older generations, which we'll all be pretty soon. And so we should care about this, even if we don't, not just about caring about our grandparents and so forth. But it's really important that, what we're doing as a society, how it's actually influencing these other people that are not necessarily a part of it. And how it's probably not just detracting from their happiness, but their sense of meaning also in some ways. And I guess the only other thing I would say is how technology is also sort of getting away our sense of mystery and wonder in general too for similar things. I think mystery and wonder and awe, those type of things make our life
Mm,
feel meaningful. Those are very
yeah.
special emotions, very special experiences that we that we really appreciate when they happen to us. But we just don't do it as much, again, because we're glued to our phones. And so we don't like to think about things. We don't like to have this sense of curiosity as much. We like to get the facts and we like to know them now quickly. And so I
Yeah.
think it's important for us to, really start thinking about those issues and how we can,
Yeah.
help become a happier, more society, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you so
Yeah.
much for that message. It's such a nice way to close our topic of today about meaning in life. And I think it's such a nice thing to share because it's so interrelated to everything that we have mentioned before. And when you close with, like, oh, we haven't had a sense of awe, wonder, and, maybe some of us haven't had that in such a long time. I thought about that immediately. And yeah, it's such a nice message to our audience. If you have not had that experience, maybe it's time to ditch your phone and do something that would give you a sense of awe and wonder. It's time.
Temporarily. Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Josh, for being here. And for our audience, if they're interested in finding out more about meaning in life and your work, where can they find you?
Go to the Texas A&M University's website, Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, and you'll find me right there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And again, such a great topic. I believe we could have gone on for a while because there's so much more to unpack. And I'm sure if we got to sit in one of your class, we'll probably learn even more and have a really nice discussion and just, talk about everything and nothing matters. But with the purpose of a podcast, this is all we can deliver. However, it's such a nice way to start thinking about these deeper topics that we've been talking about. So thank you truly for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.